Well, hello there everyone. Armored Core 6 is one of my favorite games. In fact, a few days ago I was talking with some friends on Discord, and after giving it some consideration, it's my third favorite video game of all time. I've actually had the footage recorded for this game for months now, but it took me entirely too long to write a script. And regardless, after many rematches against the bosses, I think it's time to finally talk about them. That being said, I am glad that you can rematch the bosses and replay the missions whenever you want to, instead of having to play through the entire game, because it lets me really enjoy the fights a lot more, and I can safely say this is the highest quality bosses in any From Software game, at least in my opinion. And in total, I came out to a total of 27 bosses to rank for this video. 18 unique bosses, 5 AC battles that stood out from the regular ones, and 4 battles with the game's resident salt factory. For those of you who know, you know. Either way, I think that's enough stalling, so let's get to talking about the worst boss in Armored Core 6, and the one fight keeping this game from having a near-perfect boss roster. Yeah, we're going to talk about Nepenthes. Number 27, Nepenthes. To the surprise of absolutely no one that's played this game, Nepenthes is a really boring fight. You have to keep descending down a shaft in order to reach the weak spot of Nepenthes and shoot it a few times for the win. Now, I appreciate them trying something different, but it's not fun, and there are 2 other large-scale bosses that are just better in general. Now, if there was a way you could realistically dodge the laser fire of Nepenthes, it'd be alright, but no, you can't. You can maybe dodge 1 blast, and you're gonna get hit by the other 3, so you basically just have to play a stealth mission with you slowly going down a pit. Not the greatest idea of fun, especially because once you learn the basics of counting to 6, you're never going to die. Ever. And it's annoying because once you get down to the bottom, the fight's over. Nepenthes can't do anything to fight back against you, and you may think, okay, well, yeah, sure, the challenge is getting to it. But there's 2 other giant level-like bosses as well, and at least they have some sort of resistance you have to deal with before you get there. I don't know. It's not my idea of fun, and it really does bring down an otherwise amazing boss roster. Number 26, Gun 5 Iguazu. The first of many battles with Iguazu that will be appearing on this list. The Living Salt Factory is honestly super easy by this point in the game. It's not bad, which is a pretty big positive considering he's the second worst boss in the game, but this fight is over very quickly and lacks any of the tricks the future Iguazu battles will bring, which is ironic considering that on your first playthrough, this is where you kill him. But once you start getting into the new game cycles, he becomes a much more prevalent threat. Number 25, the attack helicopter. How did so many people find this guy impossible? No, he's not the easiest in the world, but just make sure you keep moving and use your sword on him. That being said, this fight isn't exactly the pinnacle of quality, which is kind of a shame considering it's an introductory boss, and that's for 2 main reasons. First off, there's no build variety in this battle, since you're locked to the default AC build, and the boss is able to fly out of the arena barrier. Not a problem for guns and missiles, but it is a serious annoyance for melee. I really wish I could say more, but this fight is just kind of like the Elijah one from Metal Wolf Chaos, but worse in every way because no build variety. And it's not that interesting to look at either. Thankfully, you do get a rematch with it in the late game, but I didn't find that fight really worth talking about either, because then it's just a joke that you curb stomp. It's just a shame that so many people seem to have gotten filtered by this fight, considering this is an otherwise outstanding game. Nepenthes notwithstanding. Number 24, the Sea Spider. Now, I don't like this fight a ton, but I don't think it's bad. Mechanically, it is definitely better designed than the bottom 3, but in terms of enjoyment, it's not going to be winning any awards. Phase 1 actually isn't terrible. I think there's some good telegraphs, both visually and audio-wise. And the stomps, while a little bit janky at times, are fun to dodge. But his laser cannon has this bad habit of sometimes firing off multiple shots with little warning, and unless you're mashing moves to the side, you'll likely get hit because there isn't much time to react. In fact, there's no real difference between one shot or two shots. Then you get to phase 2, and I hope you have an AC that's good at flying, otherwise your life is going to suck. But first, we have to talk about the patch. Out of every boss, Sea Spider suffered the worst because of this patch. Beforehand, this boss had arguably too much HP, and phase 2 would just constantly carpet bomb the arena. But now his health has been reduced so much his second phase will barely last 30 seconds, and that's to say nothing about the lobotomized AI that just sits there and lets you beat it, while only occasionally throwing out a weak laser or two. I don't know, it's not the worst fight ever, but considering that this is essentially the Chapter 2 boss, it's definitely underwhelming compared to some fights.
Attacking a watch point. You're incorrigible, Handler Walter. How many of your dogs must I kill before you learn?
Number 23, Sula. The test pilot and burn pickaxe were basically Baby's first mini-boss, while this guy is more of a proper introduction to AC battles. And while I'm not counting it separately, I am also going to give some points because they make some changes to his fight on New Game Plus Plus as a way of showing how different the final playthrough is going to get. Unfortunately, that's about it, since we don't really know anything about Sula, and his fight isn't anything crazy. He's introduced and killed off all within the span of about 4 minutes, and while that's fine for a throwaway AC mini-bosses, that's a bit of a problem considering that, well, Sula has his own introductory cutscene, and presumably has some history with Walter, leading you to think he may be a bit of a big deal, or serve some purpose later on in the narrative, but no, you just take him out, and he dies. At the very least, he does show you the usefulness of the pulse gun, something that is going to save your ass against the boss fight that follows right after it.
One of the infamous Handler Walter's hounds. Interesting. You ready to climb the wall?
Number 22, Juggernaut. Now, the Juggernaut is a fairly simple early game boss, but I actually like this fight quite a bit. He gets points for including Rusty, but more so, I like the fight just because it has a pretty good fast pace for the early game. Though I will admit it does lose some points for how easy it is to cheese this fight, because if you can fly at all, which unless you're rocking tank treads you will be able to, you can pretty much turn this fight into a joke, and I think it does turn a little bit too fast for its own good. I think overall this fight would have been better if they slowed the turning speed of the Juggernaut slightly and made this the tutorial boss, because this feels much more like a starting battle than the attack helicopter. Regardless though, I still think it's a good fight, and while it does suffer somewhat from the lack of options, you do at least have some build variety you can bring in by this point, and hey, it's a fun enough early game battle, even if it's not a challenge in the slightest after your first or second attempt. Oh, and one neat detail I didn't know about before writing this part of the video is that if you kill this boss fast enough, you get special dialogue from Rusty because you'll have killed the boss before Rusty leaves the battle arena. That's cool. Number 21. The Smart Cleaner. I remember seeing this boss and thinking this was going to be some big in-game challenge. Surprise, surprise, it's fought in the first third of the game. Smart Cleaner takes a more melee focus to combat as opposed to projectiles, which does make things interesting, and there are two ways to fight this boss, either blasting the small opening on its face, or blasting the smokestack on top. Well, I say there's options, but what you're going to be doing is hovering above it at a 45-ish degree angle to avoid any eruptions and just keep blasting away at the smokestack with high power attacks. I will say, there is a ton of fun to be had from using high recoil weapons to see how long you can keep yourself in the air without touching the ground, but I do wish that the opening on the front was maybe a little bit larger and there was a way where at low HP it would close the smokestack to keep you from just cheesing out the whole fight, because as it stands, it ends up being admittedly really cool looking, but ultimately fairly easy and kind of forgettable boss fight. Number 20, Strider. Here we have the obligatory level boss that really shows off this game's sense of scale, and holy shit does it have a great sense of scale. Overall, I enjoy it a lot, and I wish we had at least one more large-scale boss fight like this in the game, but it sadly wasn't meant to be. Outside of the surprisingly accurate lasers, this boss really doesn't have any challenge you need to worry about, but it is only the second boss in the game, so that's kind of to be expected, and it's the first boss where you're allowed any build variety. It works well enough for what they're going for, and ultimately, the Strider is so large that, again, it's basically level itself, so the challenge and the fun is navigating the body of the Strider to find the generators and destroy them before you can take down the eye. I guess on one hand, this boss could be compared to Nepenthes, but it does a few things much better. One, you're actually navigating through a giant mech instead of just dropping down a pit, occasionally taking cover, so there's a more dynamic movement going on here, instead of just go down, hide behind cover every now and then. Two, this fight is much earlier in the game, so the simplicity of it is fine and honestly good design, instead of just disappointing. And lastly, even after you reach the weak point, the Strider isn't completely defenseless, as the eye will still fire off deadly lasers at you. Meanwhile, Nepenthes couldn't do anything once you reach the bottom. While it's not the most exciting boss in repeat playthroughs, I still think it's a lot of fun. It's a good way to get players hooked into the game, and it makes for an interesting time to see on repeat playthroughs how fast can you beat it. Just watch out for the stomps or the collapsing. It will insta-kill you if you're not careful, and you will die and look like an idiot. Number 19, Iguazu and Volta. Now, this boss is fairly basic on its own, as you're just fighting Iguazu and Volta. Okay, it's a multi-boss, what's the big deal? But it has one of the largest arenas in the entire game, spanning the entire level. And quite a large level at that. And you can also make use of the MTs that went from being enemies to being friendlies as a way to give yourself some backup in battle. While the arena being so large is cool, it ultimately just ends up being two 1v1s back to back. And as this boss is locked behind New Game Plus, you've already fought Iguazu by this point, and Volta is fought fairly early on in the arena. I do appreciate the game for showing that New Game Plus is going to be very different from your first playthrough, and it plays its cards very early on. But I'll admit, this isn't the best fight, and it's nowhere near the best AC or even best multi-boss in Armored Core 6. Though, I will give it some credit, this fight is genuinely much tougher than you expect it to be. Not so much for Volta, he's pretty easy, but Iguazu, for some reason, his stats are absolutely jacked in this fight. It's kind of hilarious. But, you know, it does provide a good challenge at least, and it is, I guess, technically the first time you get to kick the shit out of him, in this timeline anyways.
See how far they can fly. On borrowed wings.
After trekking through half the game, you meet the original Raven, the one whose name you stole. The fight itself is honestly not going to be anything mind-blowing. It's a higher and tougher than average fight against an AC. But there is a much slower and more deliberate pacing to this battle than some of the other fights. It's not fast-paced, hectic chaos. Everything is purposeful, like Armored Core 5 bosses. For better or for worse. I think in this case a little bit for better. Now, I still think this fight is a ton of fun, but I will admit it does suffer a little bit in being kind of lore foddery, because it feels like they're trying to capture the same feeling as the White Glint boss fight from Armored Core 4 Answered, but it misses the mark because we never really interact with Nightfall Raven or get to know him in a previous game. He's just kind of here as a boss that you beat the crap out of, and then he just dies. His character never talks once, you only hear the operator, which is kind of a callback to the previous Armored Core games, which I like. But yeah, it doesn't quite hit the same as, say, again, White Glint and Armored Core 4 Answer, or some of those other fights where you battle against the player character from the previous game, because Nightfall, at least as far as I remember, never was a playable character. Number 17, Pater. I understand putting this boss this high on the list is probably a hot take because of how generally easy the fight is, but he did get a little bit of a buff in some recent patches, and while his health isn't anything crazy, he's got enough common sense to stay at range and keep the barrage of missiles going. Though, what honestly gets this fight up to a good tier for me is the story. At this point, everything's gone to hell. Balam's pulled out of the conflict, Arquebus is in shambles, Rusty is nowhere to be seen, and then there's Pater, the lowest ranking member of Arquebus that we know of, that's trying his best, but he's clearly not prepared for any of this. No, the fight isn't this grand epic battle, but, I mean, what are you expecting from the guy who's just barely holding it together in the middle of this life or death struggle? One interesting fact about this fight is if you take long enough, he'll actually start to become more delusional, zoning out, and sounding kind of crazy when he dies. But if you kill him fast enough, you can feel like a total piece of crap as he's desperately trying to keep fighting only for his LC to blow up on him. Though, I can't ignore the big problem with this fight that holds it back a lot. This is the second to last boss of the true ending route, and you can kill him in under a minute if you really try. I really think they should have either tripled his HP or had one more major boss fight between this and the true final boss, because, let me tell you, the other two penultimate bosses are much higher on this list. Number 16, Michigan. It's the dialogue. Really, this fight is one of the most ridiculous gang bosses I've ever seen, but I can't hate it because of Michigan's dialogue just hyping you up the whole time.
Like Arquebus sent some clown on a suicide mission. Cute, real cute.
The only clown around here is you, Kennebec. You're talking about the wall climber, the word killer, the only gun 13 has managed to live this long. Until the Liger Tail deploys, the odds are not in your favor. You better keep the emergency E-check primed.
I heard my brother go down gunfire and watch him.
Watch you? Oh yeah, the deserter who pissed his pants and ran.
By all accounts, I should hate this boss. It's mechanically not very well designed. You're fighting waves upon waves of enemies before a really tough AC comes down to fight you at the end. This is easily 50 versus 1. But there's just something awesome about tearing through the army, and what's left of Balaam, while you have Michigan hyping you up the entire time. It's impossible to dislike this man. He's hilarious. DC Douglas does a great job voicing his character. Now, I can't put it any higher, because at the end of the day, this fight is just a little too absurd. But I gotta admit, while From Software doesn't usually make funny games, I'm just too busy laughing my ass off at how absurd this final stand of Balaam's is. It shouldn't be funny by any means, but it just is.
Magnus, great. You can tell this to the stern. Mean old Michigan died on
AC Lighters held destroyed. Gun 1 Michigan down. That leaves the MTs to take care of.
Number 15. V2 Snail and Gun 5 Iguazu. On New Game Plus Plus, instead of being taken out from behind by Snail, you get a chance to get the drop on him, taking him out instead. And turns out Iguazu's hate boner for you gets him in on the fight as well. This fight stands out because, unlike a lot of the other multi-bosses, Snail and Iguazu aren't on the same side. They want to kill each other just as much as they want to kill you, so instead of it being a 2v1, it's a full-blown free-for-all. And it can make things easier for you, but the fight can also be really tough because you're fighting in-game builds. Either way, while not as cool as some other fights with these two, it's satisfying to get the jump on Snail, and Iguazu's salt levels will never not be funny. Though, I would say that there are both definitive versions for both Snail fights and Iguazu fights that we'll get to. Number 14, the Enforcer. Here, we have a good boss that I often forget about. Not in a the boss isn't memorable sort of way, but in a I always forget that this boss is at the end of this level sort of way. Because I keep thinking that it has its own mission like Cataphract, but no, it's at the end of one of the game's longest levels. Honestly, the Enforcer probably could have been a chapter boss in its own right. It's a fun fight, but it's definitely one that can catch players off guard because this is your first humanoid boss that doesn't fight like a standard AC. Well, Phase 1 kind of fights like a heavy armored core, but then you get to Phase 2 where he becomes a lot more melee focused. This fight can honestly be really tough. I remember my first playthrough, it took me about 7 attempts to get through it, and I think it works well as a way to prepare the player for the harder bosses to come, because most of this game's toughest fights take place in Chapter 4 and 5, aside from pre-patch Balteus, and in some ways, I think of this as sort of like the Dragon Slayer armor from Dark Souls 3, except in Armored Core 6. It's a fairly challenging late-game fight that's not the hardest in the world, but it's there to get you prepped for the real struggles that are going to await you. Number 13, the Ice Worm. Say hello to the obligatory gimmick boss of the game. It's not the best one From Software has made, that would probably be Rykard from Elden Ring, but the worm is still a very enjoyable battle, with you using the stun needle to bring down the shields. And I do appreciate that the gimmick weapon you get, the stun needle, is genuinely useful outside of this boss fight that it was made for. The Ice Worm is a boss that has a ton of style and a decent enough amount of substance, but I'll admit, on its own the gameplay isn't the most compelling thing ever. What really makes this fight stand out is you get to battle alongside Snail, Iguazu, Chatty, and Rusty while getting some commentary from Michigan. It's the cinematic boss fight of the game, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I appreciate when hard games will sometimes throw you an awesome looking boss that's easy to bring down. There's a way to keep the player encouraged. And while mechanically it's a kind of slow fight, I have to be honest, the final hit is so cool that it speaks for itself. Just watch.
Good work, buddy. All EML modules connected. Energy turbines at full capacity. Output at 80, 90. All emergency valves closed. Disabling limiter. 100, 110, 115. Output. All or nothing.
Target's whole shield has been wiped out.
Over. Get clear, it's gonna blow! Shit me. The freelance really did it.
Number 12, Balteus. This fight would have been higher back in the earlier days of the game, but they nerfed him way too much. Still, this is by far the toughest fight in the early game. Phase 1 is fairly simple, as Balteus is protected by an energy shield, and will fill the screen with missiles that used to be pretty tough to dodge, though nowadays it's fairly easy. Still cool looking, but if you just kind of move somewhat fast in one direction, you'll dodge it. The attack you really need to watch out for is the heavy cannon, as it instead will briefly flash on your radar and audio telegraph, meaning you need to dodge out of the way now. Phase 2 is the same, except now he starts incorporating the flamethrowers and using them kind of like swords, which is just badass to even think about, but also works fairly well in execution. The attacks feel natural to dodge, and it flows well. That shield the boss has is a double-edged sword, however, as it will prevent Balteus from taking any damage, but whenever the shield goes down, it instantly staggers. Back on launch, this was awesome, because it really encouraged build experimentation, and it showed the pulse guns were by far the best option for tearing down the shield, but you'd have to get in close and engage with the boss. Problem is, after the updates, the shields were also nerfed to hell and back, so now any decent energy weapon tears right through Balteus' shield. So now you can just kind of stun lock this version of the boss with little issue, and that does significantly reduce the fun of the fight, at least in my opinion. Still, I do find this boss to be enjoyable enough on a new game file to be in the great tier, but if you're on New Game Plus, it really does become little more than a speed bump with a much, much better version of this fight at the end of the game. Number 11, Honest Brute. So, if we're counting just the battle at the very end, it's just another AC duel with maybe an obsession for flamethrowers. But I kind of like to count the level leading up to him as well, as he's the one who set out all the traps for you to navigate through, and you have dialogue between him and Carla throughout the level. It's a fun test of your mobility, and navigating through the obstacle course is actually quite enjoyable. I like to see how far I can get without actually hitting the ground, and I've still yet to successfully make it all the way to Brute without touching the ground, but, well, maybe someday. Plus, the dialogue between Brute and Carla does add some value to the fight in my opinion, and while I did say it was just a standard AC fight, that's not entirely fair, because, well, he has flamethrowers, and he's basically the only AC using flamethrowers, as he follows the Mech Warrior Online strategy of, if they spin the whole battle on fire, they can't fight back. Thankfully, flamethrowers aren't nearly as busted in Armored Core 6, but still, the dialogue, navigation, and a decent enough fight to cap it all off makes what I consider the best of the level-based boss fights. And it's a good enough challenge for the middle of the game. Number 10, Gun 5 Iguazu. Again! Alright, so the Salt Lord is back yet again, but out of all of his AC battles, this is definitely the best of the bunch. This time, Iguazu is packing gear fit for New Game++, meaning he will put up a solid fight, while talking trash like he's Vegeta. But after taking some damage, you have actually a bunch of unidentified stealth mechs show up that will try to kill the both of you. So, in the heat of battle, you're forced to call a temporary truce, where you fight off these mini-bosses, and in some cases, this may be point against the boss, but these guys are actually fun to fight, and they're not too hard to bring down. So as long as you've got your strongest equipment, it's honestly not too bad to deal with, and it feels like a bit of controlled chaos, in a way that's fun and hectic that I would not expect. But it's another one of those treats for sticking it out and making it all the way to New Game++. And while I don't think Iguazu is the best standard AC battle, we'll get to that fairly soon, I think this is one of the best shakeups, and it's a good test of skills to see if you're truly ready for what New Game++ is going to throw at you, because a lot of the new missions are where this game's difficulty really starts to shine. On top of that, I mean, it's Iguazu. There's at least some level of fun to fighting the Salt Lord, and once all the ACs go down, it's back to fighting him to the death. Number 9, Cataphract. The Tank Mech Fusion Hybrid is a fairly tough battle for the mid-game, and outside of Balteus, it's the first super fast-paced boss battle against something that's not an AC. I like this fight a lot, though. It's a constant rush, dodging his barrages of bullets, missiles, and plasma cannons, and the story has some cool parts as well, since the planetary closure forces recognize your call sign as Raven, the one responsible for this whole mess starting in the first place. But once you get the boss to about half health, it reaches phase 2, where the combat pattern changes after they realize you're not actually Raven, you're an imposter. Insert terrible Among Us joke here. For a random boss that has no fanfare introducing it, the Cataphract is awesome and puts up a strong fight. This boss is fairly low HP, but only frontal assaults will actually do any real damage, so it has a way to provide an extra skill ceiling without just inflating its HP and making it a damage sponge. I like the fight. It's fast-paced, it doesn't rely on any cutscenes, and it still gives a good challenge. Number 8, Light and Heavy Cavalry. This fight is one of those that I would say is greater than the sum of its parts, and wouldn't be anywhere near as high if not for the setting surrounding it. They work well enough as a duo fight. Light Cavalry is going to keep to the air, firing off missiles and machine gun fire, while Heavy chooses the sword and board method to unga bunga his way to victory. But thankfully, instead of being a potentially annoying duo boss, you have Rusty here to help you, and he'll do a great job keeping the heat off you. That being said, he probably can't stand up to Heavy on his own for too long, so it's recommended you bring down the Unga Bunga first, then mop up the flying jackass. However, there's not really a wrong answer. You can kind of just decide either one you want to tackle first, and that changes how the fight goes a little bit. Mostly it just means that they'll start spamming their strongest moves more often. It's not like Ornstein and Smo where there's an entirely separate phase, but hey, it's still cool for a boss that's thrown in the middle of the game, and it puts up a really good challenge. Like, this boss has killed me in about 20 seconds, even on this playthrough. And at the end of the fight, you get an awesome visual of the ice worm showing up, and being a spectacle that's fairly easy to survive. Number 7, Carla and Chatty. After the Dark Souls 3 DLC release, I was worried From Software had become incapable of making a good gank boss anymore, since Sekiro's gank monkeys were less than stellar, And the best gank in Elden Ring was, I don't know, Fia's Champions, I guess, and that's not saying much. So, imagine my surprise when one of the game's last bosses was a genuinely good gank boss. Instead of having a slow and fast duo, these two choose to work together as two halves of the same whole. Carla will be coming straight for your ass and has an aggression level that alone sets her apart from most other AC battles. But then there's Chatty, who's going to hang out on the top level of the arena, laying down suppressive fire to keep you moving. But his attacks are never cheap, it just makes you mind your positioning a bit and keep on moving. You can take out either of them first, but the smart move is to bring down Carla first, since she's constantly on your ass. Then you can also make clever use of the arena because of the half ceiling thing it's got going on, as a way to stay out of Chatty's line of fire. But once Carla goes down, Chatty decides to take you head on while raining fire down in the arena. And while the last phase isn't hard, it's intense enough to be exciting. Wrap it all up with what I consider the most underrated boss theme in the game, and you've got yourself a respectable 7th place. Number 6, Ibis. I was really going back and forth between having this boss be an amazing tier boss or being a garbage tier boss. On one hand, its aggression levels border on being unreasonable, and it has a damage output that will kill you faster than you can say I am Millennia, Blade of Mikola. But on the other hand, when executed properly, this boss is a dance like no other, making use of the game's 3-dimensional movement, arguably better than any other fight in the game. The music in this fight is beautifully haunting, but the repeat dialogue gets so annoying you'll be sick of it by your 3rd attempt. On top of that, while I can appreciate a good challenge, a lot of those other hardest bosses in From Software games are typically optional, but this one's required to even see your first ending, and it might be a bit too much. Though, that's up in the air. The boss then pulls a second health bar out of its ass to make you fight an even larger strain on your resources, but at the same time, the first phase has so little HP it can be downed in 30 seconds. Yeah, this fight gives me even more mixed emotions than Millennia does, but I guess I was in a good mood when I was doing the final placements of Ibis, so it is able to earn the number 6 spot and just barely squeeze inside the amazing tier, because when everything works, it works beautifully.
621. Is that you?
We're in the top 5, and we're only now getting to one of the final boss fights. The fight with Walter is technically another AC fight, but his moveset makes him unlike any other, with him using a lot of big, powerful coral weapons that you can actually unlock for yourself, which is really cool. But they also make the fight have a different feel from other AC battles, because of not only what's going on in the story, but the way his attacks function, where he has a lot more scripted movesets at points. It's just a way to keep things fair instead of fast and spammy. And ultimately, speaking of the story, you're fighting Walter, your handler, and overall one of the few friends you've had throughout the game. It's not a fight you want to happen either, but unfortunately he was re-educated by Arquebus, so now we pretty much have to mercy kill him. And the setting of this fight is amazing. You're on the back of the Xylem, which is currently burning up as it falls back into Rubicon's atmosphere, all while the best song in the game plays over the fight, which really sets the emotions for this fight. My only gripe, which arguably isn't even a complaint, is that I consider this to be the easiest From Software final boss. Not counting True King a lot, but that's a cutscene. I've currently defeated this boss about 15 times, and I have not died once. And for the record, I've beaten almost every modern From Software game, including the Dark Souls trilogy, Demon's Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring, and even Armored Core Verdict Day. And this final boss is far and away the easiest of them, outside of, again, True King a lot and Demon's Souls, which may as well just be a second phase to False King a lot. Still, the emotional impact of this fight, the fun of Armored Core 6's combat in general, and the fact that you can get every single piece of equipment that Walter uses, I think is more than enough to push him up to 5th place. And he's the greatest player character boss that From Software has ever made. Please make more of these, FromSoft, and less Sir Gideon Ofnir's.
You found a friend.
Walter! And yet you turned your back on our shared potential. You want to silence us forever. Raven, I will stop you. You will never burn Rubicon.
If the final battle with Walter made you feel bad, this fight against Air will make you feel like an absolute piece of shit. Practically spitting in Air's face and kicking her while she was down after she spent almost the entire journey helping you out. She's a boss with 2 distinct phases, so you'll actually need a bit of a diverse build to win this fight. Phase 1 has her doing the energy shield, just like Balteus, and she honestly plays fairly passive in this part, as outside of some tiny pot shots, she only has one direct attack. The music itself is also quite calm and somber. It's almost as if this is her final plea to get you to stop fighting, but once she gets to half health, she does away with her shield, and she also does away with trying to talk you out of it.
I realize what you are. A spark of war. Fires that haunt Rubicon.
At this point, the fight gets a little bit crazy. The missiles, the lasers, the shadow clones, well, laser clones, I guess, and her busting out a lightsaber, dashing right up to you, and pausing for a split second before attacking. And I appreciate that the arena isn't just a flat circle, or circle with pillars, because those pillars actually provide some decent cover at first, and then they become part of the destructible environment, giving some spectacle as the space battle rages on. And I love this fight. It's a solid challenge, and it's just plain fun. The only thing I don't like about it is that I feel like a piece of crap playing it. I'd say this fight is a top 20 From Software boss battle, though, to be fair, Armored Core 6 has the advantage of having you fight actual characters you get to know, and not just figures you read about in item descriptions of, I don't know, a piece of socks or something. Number 3, Snail Balteus. I fucking hate Snail, but in a good way. His boss fight is amazing. So, we took the Balteus frame, did away with the missiles, and in place, added lasers. gave him plasma cannons that he can use as swords instead of flamethrowers, and it's another boss similar to Air, where the boss talks directly to you, though this one is less sorrowful betrayal and more pure malice. Phase 1 of Snail Balteus actually fights quite a bit like a standard Balteus from, well, Act 1, but with more energy weapons instead of a barrage of missiles. On one hand, they are less likely to stun lock you, but on the other hand, these projectiles linger, so you need to mind your positioning in a game with 3D movement, and that's honestly a lot more fun than it may seem. Then you get to Phase 2, where he uses his plasma cannons like they're swords and does the obligatory dragon laser combo thing that we saw Madir and then later Placidusax do. The fight is all backed up by some awesome dialogue between Air and Rusty, encouraging you to kick ass while hearing Arquebus slowly crumble to the ground before finally, after, in my case, 2 entire playthroughs, you get to put this bastard down for good.
I am Arquebus. One last plan.
Confirmed. V2 Snail, down.
Sounds like it's over.
Here we are, buddy. I was right all along. You were just another threat to Rubicon.
Okay, I'll admit, from an objective standpoint, this fight is probably too high, but fuck it. I love this fight. On the Fires of Ravenroot, Rusty makes his final appearance as one of the game's penultimate bosses. And as we've now covered Snail and Pater, I've realized that all 3 penultimate bosses are against Arquebus members. Huh. So, the fight with Rusty is technically an AC fight, but there is so much anime thrown in that it's a different beast entirely. For one, you're in the upper atmosphere of Rubicon, which for plot reasons mean both you and Rusty have unlimited boost in this one mission only, and you can take this fight just about anywhere in the sky. It also helps that this is probably the funnest mission in the entire game. Second, his AC, the Steel Hazortus, which was designed to look less like an armored core and more like a Gundam, and I love Gundam, and Rusty has a hilarious bit of coding where he is hard-coded to start the boss fight by assault boosting into you. Dude is straight up coming for your ass. Other than that, the fight is essentially the ultimate test of your AC skills, as Rusty fights like a PvP master, and unlike the NPC bosses in Souls, the AC fights are all at least fun. And this one is more than fun, it's awesome. Then the anime continues as you take his health bar out.
I won't stop. Chase the clouds from over Rubicon. Only I can fly high enough.
Through sheer force of will, he regains half of his health bar, and the music swells. It begins to sound all heroic and encouraging. He's going to stop you from burning Rubicon. But unfortunately, Rusty may be the hero, but he's not the main character.
Flew just out of reach, buddy.
Well, well. I've been waiting for this, freelancer. I became part of this monster, so I could crush you. This time, you will die.
Okay, I have to be honest, I laughed my ass off when I learned that Iguazu was the true final boss. The man let himself become absorbed by a deadly AI in order to have another chance to kill you. This guy is motivated by pure spite, and it gets him farther than anyone else in the game, which I have to respect. Dude pulled an Edward Diego, powered by salt. Anyways, All Mind is split into 3 phases, and I'll be honest, the first phase isn't anything too crazy. He's a slightly tanky AC, with crappy mobility, and some ads that crumble like paper. Now, it can be a bit annoying if you're not built well, but it's honestly a lot of fun if you can tear through them quickly. And things like Red Shift, or honestly any coral weapon, will shred these guys down to size in literal seconds. Then, after a somewhat just okay Armored Core fight, the true form of All Mind appears, and the final battle really begins. But All Mind isn't alone. It's accompanied by not 1, but 2 sea spiders. But not to worry, Air will actually show up to help you with an AC of her own for this battle. Now, even with Air's help, having All Mind accompanied by 2 blue versions of the Chapter 2 boss would get overwhelming and probably be a pain in the ass, but thankfully not only are the attacks synchronized well, so the sea spiders feel like an extension of All Mind instead of being separate entities, and your radar is also going to be there and give you some visual warning for any off-screen heavy attacks. All Mind itself does have some cool attacks in this phase, but it's mostly toned down for Air to help you, and her barriers actually do a good job at stopping attacks. Really, this feels like, at least this phase feels like Air Phase 2, and that's not bad because that's a good fight. But what really makes this fight special is once you get All Mind to half health and you get to Phase 3.
Shut up! I'll shut you all up!
It's resonating.
Iguazu, what are you? Interference! I'm losing sync!
Getting to Phase 3, Iguazu's salt levels become so high, he causes an EMP burst that destroys the sea spiders, cripples Air, and locks out All Mind, and it just becomes a 1v1 with the saltiest entity on this side of Rubicon. And it's awesome. If the fight with Air or Ibis were more graceful dances, and the fight with Walter was a somber duel, this fight is pure savage ferocity. Instead of elegant sword and laser combos, this guy busts out the Moonlight Great Claws and will start tearing through the sky itself. And the claws aren't just for show, you need to be more on point with your dodges so you don't get clipped. Yes, the fight is a long one. It's a challenge, but thankfully, unlike Elden Ring, it's little issue getting back to Phase 2 or 3 of the fight, unlike Elden Beast that spends half the battle running away, and you also have to deal with Gratagun before you can even get there. All Mind will instead spend the better half of this fight up in your face, and it's the true final boss where you have to do 3 playthroughs worth to even get here, and you have 3 playthroughs worth of equipment to make the perfect AC. It should be a challenge, but thankfully it's a fun one. My only real issue with this fight, and it's really just a nitpick, is the music. It does its job as an intense final boss theme, but it sounds a bit too chaotic in the final phase, and it's definitely not beating out Air, Walter, or Rusty's boss themes. Either way, All Mind is a fantastic treat to reward players that stuck with the game all the way through, and I'm more than happy to say the true final boss of this game is the best boss of this game.
The freelancer who had it all.
Well, that's all for this ranking. I've been sitting on this footage for this video for honestly about 2 months now, but never had time to get around to scripting because things like college, but hey, better late than never. If you're one of the 2 whole people who watched this far, thank you so very much. If you want to see more content like this, or just random content in general, consider subscribing for more videos and content in the future. I'm currently working on some other boss rankings, and I'm working on a challenge run for Final Fantasy XIII. So, yeah, expect some pain and suffering in the near future. and hopefully different styles of videos and not just being boss rankings because, oh look, another boss ranking view. I'm rambling. Okay. Have fun. Take care, guys.